Greetings, here is my attempt to show my data, and I stress attempt. So my research question is, how can tracking students' reading in a formal way impact student reading habits and attitudes about reading? And so my community this past year was the freshman class of 2021. At the beginning of the year, I had 74 students, and as you can see, the numbers went down. At the beginning of the year, that was my breakdown on the right-hand side with males and females and race, and all the way at the bottom, I've got it broken down by my IEP students, my 504 students, and my TAG students. Not sure if any of this even matters, but I kept track of it. At the beginning of the year, within the first week, I asked these same questions, and they'll be on the next slide. And then I asked them again as a reflection during finals week during first semester, and then finally at the end of the year as a reflection during finals week. And it was clear that they were done at the end of the year. So the two questions were, how do you feel about reading in school? And then I did the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 scale, where 5 was love and 1 was the worst. And then I had them explain it. And then, how do you feel about reading outside of school, where 5 was the worst and 1 was the best, just to see if that impacted them. It was also so that they would actually read the question. And then I had them answer if they tracked their reading and why they tracked their reading. And this happened 3 times last year. So from the beginning of the year, here are some of my little surveys, and this is where my tallying came in. So this was beginning, and then some data from the middle of the school year at the end of first semester, and some responses. And then again from the end of the year as well, and the responses from the end of the year. So what I did was then I tallied up those responses at the beginning of the year, in the middle of the year, where I then realized they weren't scared little freshmen anymore, and so they went outside of the little boxes, and so some of them chose to circle between numbers, and so I had to come up with a category for that. And some of them did, well, sometimes I track, so I had to come up with a category for that. So then I took all of these, the tallies, and I put them into an Excel spreadsheet, the only way that I knew how. And this is what I came up with. And I don't think that this is the best representation of these numbers, but it's all that I could think of. So the end of the year is the brighter green, and it goes backwards, which I also don't like. So it goes from the end of the year to the end of first semester to the beginning of the year. And the beginning of the year is that teal. And the first image that we're looking at is their attitudes towards inside school reading. So what's required. So at the beginning of the school year, it's very exciting because some of the students thought that it was the worst thing ever. But at the middle and at the end of the school year, no one thought that. So I feel like that's a huge win. Good job, sunshine. But everything else, I'm trying to interpret in terms of, well, some of the numbers changed and shifted, and where do those numbers go? Is that, so like, for example, I would prefer not to read at the beginning of the year was super high, but at the middle and the end of the year, that number went down significantly. The middle ground, where they don't mind reading in school, but it's not really the greatest. At the beginning of the year, that number was the highest, but then it went down a lot at the end of first semester, but then it went back up again at the beginning, at the end of the school year. And then I keep going, so the students that love it and don't mind it at all, that was really high at the beginning of the year as well. And then in the middle of the year, that went down, but at the end of the year, it went back up again. So I don't know how to necessarily interpret that one especially. And then lastly, I love it, and I wish we read more in school, where you could see I just had like one kiddo at the beginning of the year say that, but then at the middle of the year, it totally went up, and I was like, woohoo! But then at the end of the year, it went down again. And I have some ideas as to why that happened, but I'm running out of time. So, do you track your reading? It goes backwards again, which I hate. At the beginning of the year, no one tracked. In the middle of the year, Some people were tracking, but not everyone was tracking. And at the end of the year, almost everybody was tracking because they knew that they would suffer my wrath, which is a whole nother conversation. And then lastly, why do they track their reading? Almost everybody tracked because they have to, except by the end of the year, I had students who like to track, which was an increase of 13%, because if you notice at the beginning of the year, no one was tracking their reading, so no one liked it or didn't like it or didn't had to, so that was really exciting as well. All right, and then I had them do an additional wrap-up at the end of the year where I had them describe their readings to see if they could make any connections between whether they had to track their reading or not, and if that impacted how they felt about their reading. And then that's where I was trying to code. But as you can see, it was really hard to code some of these things. I didn't know where to go. So I would just was super overwhelmed by everybody's responses, and so I just looked at everything. And then I read chapter 6 from this week, and I was like, okay, so now let's just go through it and see some ideas. So then I just started drawing faces on my surveys, and some things started to come up. So I have attitude came up, pride was something that came up, again, attitude, where it was either about logging or their attitude towards reading, and so I started to track that. Pride came up again. Sometimes students didn't make any connection between tracking and their attitude, but so that's something I'm going to have to look more closely at. But this is some of the coding that I did with some of my surveys. Feel free to pause and read some of them because they're kind of funny. Feel free. Some of my surprises and unpreparedness is the pride thing that did come up. I forgot about that aspect of learning and reading. How motivation impacted my students, especially at the end of the year when a lot of my students were very overwhelmed with a lot of work that we were expecting them to do. And then the growth in tracking appreciation. I was totally surprised by that, so that's great. So overall, I'm wondering if there's too many other factors that impact attitudes towards reading at the end of the year, and if my data is skewed because of that. I did realize that positive attitudes towards reading really stayed positive. I didn't have much of an impact on that, which I shouldn't be surprised by. And then some negative attitudes did shift, but not in a way that really, really glaringly stands out. So, sorry for going long. I appreciate you listening.